Greetings and salutations, and we are back with my Quizzaciously's or Quizzes adventures through Classic. Now, the last time I did a video on this, it didn't go very well. I think it's got like one view in a week, so this might be just the last installation of it. And as I said, we were doing an Affliction Warlock, and I just what I like about this game, and it's something that I've liked over the past 20 years, is Classic had a look and feel that made you appreciate the community at large. It made you actually appreciate the groups you got. It made you appreciate running into people, talking to them, giving them hints and advice that they didn't know. And yes, when you revisit it 20 years later and you look back on it, is it as good as it used to be? No, there's changes now. And the changes are everybody knows where everything is. Everybody knows what everything's worth. You can no longer find those players that are pretty much a rookie. That's pretty much dead and gone these days. And that's as much of a shame as it is. It's just the natural progression of a game. Once one person finds an exploit or something, 9 times out of 10, everyone proceeds to use it, and then you've got literally nothing. It's just the same thing over and over again. And that's kind of what this headed down, right? Everyone does it. So, but that feeling, and I guess it's not even really nostalgia, but the feeling of being able to get on and meet random people that play the game and get to know them, build a new guild, play with them, experience content that, yes, well, it's old and everyone knows all the mechanics and everything. You can kind of take a more of a relaxed approach with it nowadays. There's no like super competitive, oh, I gotta be the realm first, I've gotta be world first, server first. None of that. That's all gone now. Like, nobody cares. And WoW had a tragedy in three parts. And this is my firm belief, and I've extolled the same thing multiple times. I will say it numerous times until it ceases being true. And that is, there were three times in WoW's history where it took a turn down quite possibly the worst possible lane it could have. Well, the first was in Cataclysm. When the original Cataclysm came out, they brought out the new talent system, which didn't go over very well. They supposedly, quote, streamlined the trees. Nah, and nobody liked it, of course. Um, and beyond that, there was just a lot that they did. They altered a lot of the quest lines. They altered a lot of the zones. People didn't care for it. And you started seeing the cracks of where everybody started getting everything given to them. Everybody started getting a recovery move that was overpowered. Everybody started getting mitigation moves that were overpowered, or avoidance moves. And it was just really watering the game down so that it didn't really matter what class you played. It's like, oh, I'm playing a warrior. Okay, well, they get the same things that a warlock does. Warriors can mitigate X amount of this. Well, so can warlocks. Mages can do that too. So what it did is it started making it overly simplistic. So much so that I should actually probably go to the Fields of Grief and go get the pumpkins. And it started making it so overly simplistic that it just it dulled the game. It made it lose its original luster. And then it further went down the hole in Warlords of Draenor. Because in Warlords of Draenor, it took away the lore. It took away any storyline it had left. I mean, it was like, oh, this is the storyline we're working with. We had to travel back in time to find a bad guy because we ran out of bad guys to kill. Well, that's never a good thing. You never want to run out of villains. And instead of resurrecting, Deathwing a fourth time or a third time or whatever, they just decided, nope, we're gonna go back in time and we're gonna fight all of the old Orcish horde again. And that was a bad idea. And that caused a lot of problems. Legion kind of gave them back a little bit of a boost in the way that there was a lot of catch-up gear that made it so that you as a single player, if your friends weren't on, or like let's say you had you were working a heavy 9 to 5 or something like that, or you were working 10-hour shifts or something, you could get on, do dailies, and get gear comparable to your friends that might be in college and have more time to sit down and play the game or something, or other people that might have more time to play the game. And while that was a good concept, it was poorly executed. I mean, you want something for the solo player to do, and you want something for the solo player to achieve, but you don't want to ruin all the other facets of your game getting to that point. And that's kind of what they did. They overdid it. They turned the dial up to 11, and they really hurt their game, and it really hurt their product. Because now you just got on it. It's like, oh yes, well there's more gear that was brought out, and now it's in your daily chests, and then they took that away. In Battle for Azeroth, the first half of it was just kind of eh. They didn't have any gear, so you couldn't catch up, and people were starting to get very gatekeepy and saying, well, no, you can't join our Mythic 1, our Mythic Plus, because you haven't done Mythic Dungeon, so you don't get the +1 key. Oh, you haven't done this, so you can't join us, or you don't know what you're doing regarding that, so you can't join us, or your gear score just isn't high enough, you can't join us. All of these things happened. All of these things became applicable in Battle for Azeroth, or as I called it, Battle for Attention. And it really started creating this sense of you either have to no-life the game in Mythic Dungeons all the time with a solid group, or you just were never invited to a group, period. It's just the way it was. And your other option was you could pay to get carried, which means you were just out there grinding money to get carried, to get gear that you can just kind of stare at because you can't use it in Mythic Dungeons because you got paid to get carried. So the system never really helped anybody except the people that were farming it with their small group of friends. And I think the final nail in the World of Warcraft coffin, in my eyes, the third tragedy, was Shadowlands. Now, I don't call Shadowlands Shadowlands. I call it Shallowlands. Because it was both shallow in terms of content and lore, and it was bland. You had 4 covenants, which were, wow, that guild's name is Public Toilet. Nobody wants to join the public toilet. You had 4 covenants that gave buffs, but the buffs weren't equal, so one covenant always had a better buff regardless of what you were doing. And then you had to go through all the covenants to kind of make up your mind as to which covenant you wanted to join. And you still had the dailies that you had to go do. Each of the covenants had a rep grind, and each of the covenants had somewhat interesting transmog items that you had to go through an entire puzzle to solve, which that's a good idea. That's replayability factor. Whoever came up with ideas of putting puzzles into the game that are off of like cryptic statements and cryptic books that you read, and it starts a quest line that's a hidden quest line. That's cool. That's really cool. Those little scavenger hunt things. That's ingenious, and I loved it. I never really participated in one to the fullest extent of it, but the idea, the concept is amazing. So whoever came up with that idea, incredible. A plus. But it wasn't enough. Their entire the entire Shadowlands expansion was relegated to the Tower of Torghast, which to me I called the Tower of Snorgast because it was just dreadfully boring and dry. And on top of that, It was just a half-baked Greater Rift from Diablo 3. It's like they went over, they found the Diablo 3 devs, and they said, you know what? You guys are making a lateral shift to the World of Warcraft department. And that was it. And now that they made the lateral shift over there to the World of Warcraft department, congratulations, everybody. You're working on the Tower of Torghast. And it's not like you could skip the Tower of Torghast either. It's not like you could just ignore it as like, ah, yes, it's the endless grind for the solo player that wants to do endless grinds and, you know, completely min max their character that way. Nope. That was the intention, but it was not executed that way. My experience in Torghast was as such. You had a character, and you would go in and you would get one of three abilities. Now, that's like the discover mechanic from Hearthstone. Now, when you got the one of three abilities, you it may or may not have actually benefited your spec at the time. Generally, it didn't. And then you had to continue on until you got another choice of one of three, which may or may not synergize with what you had before. And if it doesn't synergize with what you had before, it's kind of almost like a dungeon run in Hearthstone. One of those storyline dungeon runs or whatever in Hearthstone, where you have this idea, but you might not be able to pull it off because it's not exactly 100% clear cut, so to speak. It's like, you want this item and this item and this item for this specific dungeon run in Hearthstone. And if you don't get those three items, that, it's completely cooked. And that's what Dungeon Run was like. Tower of Torghast is pretty much a simulation of that and Diablo 3 Greater Rift. Because you're not really timed on getting through the Tower of Torghast, but you have to clear X amount of a level to proceed to the next, to proceed to the boss. And you have to, clear out all this stuff and break jars and everything. Okay, so you break jars and everything. Well, you get to the boss, and either you have the power to basically almost one shot the guy, or you flail about aimlessly, hoping you can survive, but knowing you can't. That was Torghast. That was 100% Torghast. Sad to say it. And more often than not, you failed. Now, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, they have death prevention in terms of like you get pulled back to the beginning of the level or whatever. They had things in that regard that you could prevent your progress from being lost. However, and I love throwing that in there because there was a lot of people that loved Torghast, and I'm pretty sure they were all escaped mental patients, or they all had amnesia. One or two. Um, because at the end of the Torghast, what would happen inevitably is you'd end up either failing the boss three times, and then you would take what little bit you earned and leave, which was this ash type stuff, and or you would beat the boss and you'd get rewarded with more of it. Now, this ash was not just a direct, here's this amount of ash, like here's, you know, three or four pieces of ash, turn it in for a crate, open the crate, maybe get a piece of gear, which is what it should have been. If you're going to put RNG 3 layers deep in Torghast, you should have turned it around and made it so that you get a piece of gear that's a lottery. You open it up, it spins a lottery wheel, and then you click it, and you're like, oh, there's my piece of gear. It'll always be a piece of gear for your class, but it might not be for your spec. It might be for arms if you're a warrior, but you're Fury. Oh, well, it's a piece of arms gear. Or, oh, well, it's a piece of prot gear. But it's always for your class, just may not always be for your spec. Would have had no problems with that. I'd have been completely comfortable with that. But no, not Blizzard. Not this time. Torghast was, here's these ashes you get. You get like 5 of them, 10 of them. Doesn't sound bad. You're getting 10 of them. Torghast only took you about 10, 15 minutes tops. Seems pretty feasible. And there's levels to Torghast, so you could always challenge higher levels. But you have to beat the levels to get up to that point. Okay, seems fair. So let me go check the gear vendor. So you walk over to the gear vendor. You take a look. In order to get one piece of gear, you need like 428 pieces of ash. And it's like, I'm sorry? I now have to spend 10 to 15 minutes times 42. I have to spend 4 hours grinding Torghast for one piece of gear. Which is marginally better than what you're wearing and equivalent to dungeon gear. But they tease you because they show the legendaries. They show legendaries in the window that you can grind to earn, if you're sane enough, that were 2,000 to 3,000 ash cumulatively. You had to get this piece, which then led to that piece, which then led to another piece, which then upgraded to the legendary, and so on. It was a progressive system. But the problem is, like I said, back with the original Torghast, you not only walked in and had to deal with RNG, with the abilities that showed up, RNG with do they work for your spec and your class, and RNG, are the mobs favorable? You're 3 layers deep in RNG, and then you come out of it, and you feel like you've been shafted because you didn't get anything actually worthwhile after having to deal with frustratingly poor design. Worked okay for Diablo 3 because, well, people just accepted Diablo 3 for what it was, which was a slap in the face. Anybody with a functional cortex can see that now. And I've been trying to say that for people too. I've been trying. I've been trying to wake people up to the skullduggery that is Diablo. But nobody wants to wake up to it. You can only rip their mustache off so many times before they finally decide that that they don't feel anything anymore. Nevertheless, the RNG, and this is something that I cannot stress enough, and anybody out there that watches this video that may or may not be a game developer, I'm going to give you a piece of advice. This is one. And this is from somebody who has not only built a game once, but it is also from somebody who has played a game. RNG is fine in small doses. But the more RNG you add, the less fun a game becomes. And that's simply it. Because it's no longer reliant on the player. And that's the perspective. Like, a player wants to be relied upon to make the decisions. A player wants to see his skill become rewarded. He wants to see the fact that, hey, I did that and my skills showed off right there. That's something a player wants. Now, not all players want this. It's many of the players want it, but not all. And of course, obviously, it's never going to fit. One shoe's not going to fit every single human being. One game's not going to fit every single person. What RNG does is it nullifies skill. It's basically skill-based matchmaking through a facade. It's the facade of, oh, you were skilled, the luck just wasn't on your side. I hate to say that, but that's poor design. Because now it takes the skill out of the game completely. It's like the people that gripe about aim assist in Black Ops, right? People that use aim assist, it takes skill out of the equation. You literally are just saying, you're not skilled enough to shoot the gun by yourself. Here, let me hold your hand. That's essentially it. Same thing. RNG functions that exact same way. The RNG says, let me hold your hand with the RNG, but it's an unknown integer. You, the player, don't know if the game's going to hold your hand or break it. You just know that it exists in the game. Now, I mean, that's the same. It could be said for anything. You sit there and you can think to yourself, well, what if you're playing Magic the Gathering at the table? You shuffle up your deck and you draw the cards and it doesn't help. Okay, so you shuffle up the cards and it doesn't help. Yeah, RNG is still there, but it's not pre-programmed in a game. The key difference there is when I shuffle cards, I know that my chance of drawing said card is 1 in X, depending on whatever the X of the number of cards I have. Here's a little anecdotal Hearthstone time, Hearthstone story time to prove my point. I had a deck, this was a while ago in Hearthstone, and the deck was me, was Tamsin Warlock. Now, Tamsin Warlock it was based on having shadow spells. And what you would do is you would get the shadow spells, and Tamsin said whenever you cast a shadow spell, put a copy of it in your hand that costs 1 less. Essentially. Or there's something along that line. It was either it costs 1 less, or if it costs 1, it costs 0. And you get to copy the spell, essentially. And you would use Curse of Agony. The whole point was to draw the game down to fatigue where they were drawing nothing left. Where they had nothing left to draw, and then you shuffle a whole bunch of agonies into their deck and win on the next draw. That was the plan. Well, the deck, I almost had it sorted out completely, except I could never reliably get them down to complete fatigue. I would run out of control mechanisms before it got there, and so I had to just pull the ripcord, Tamsin Roam, Faceless Manipulator, and I end up shuffling 27 agonies into their deck. Now, how the Curse of Agony worked was when you draw Curse of Agony, deal 1 fatigue damage, casts when drawn, draw a card. So it automatically casts it, so you don't have to worry about it, and then it casts if it draws a card. Now, when it draws that card, if it draws another agony, it casts another agony, and of course, fatigue works. First one is 1, second one is 2, third one is 3, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth until they're dead, or until they don't draw an agony, and then it picks up the next time for 5, 6, 7 because it's consecutive. Um, the guy had 2 cards left in his deck. I shuffled 27 agonies into his deck, giving him a 29 card deck. He has a 2 out of essentially 30 chance, a 1 in 15 chance to not draw agony. And 100% of the time I played this deck, they never drew agony. I would put them in that situation and they would not draw the agony card at all. They always drew the card that they needed to win the game. And people would say, well, that's because those cards existed there, and then it put agonies at the bottom of their deck. No, agony says shuffle. So every time agonies went into the deck, it shuffled the deck, thus making it really confusing as to why I never saw the agonies come up. I shuffled a whole bunch in. I should have seen them. At least one, right? Never happened. So, that's where RNG kind of leveled the playing field. Notice how fun that was. Here I am, plotting, scheming, playing Control Warlock, get them down, shuffle the agonies in, only to have the game thumb its nose to me and say, well, you had the skill, but you didn't have the luck. Now do that a few dozen times. It's pretty boring. That's what happens when you put RNG, too much RNG in a game. It nullifies the player's skill. And people say, well, there's not much skill playing control. But there is. You have to know when to use the proper control mechanisms. Use them too early and you run out. Use them too late and you don't have enough life and you die. I mean, I have a control shaman that does that in Hearthstone, which my control shaman is insanely gross as a deck. However, you have to figure out, you had half of the deck playing is about piloting the deck properly. However, RNG will kill any game. The more of it you put in, the more likely you are to ruin it. Now, there's an argument to be made in the opposite direction. That if the game is all skill based and all the skill based sweats get together, it ruins the game experience because it's just filled with sweat lodge lobbies. And yes, this is true. However, if a game is based on skill and there's no luck involved and luck is removed from the equation, then the chance of you losing to some sort of shenanigans is negligible, if not completely gone. Which sounds a little, sounds like it's like I'm trying to say, hey, it's a good idea to eliminate all of that, uh, all of the RNG. I am. I'm saying that RNG should be removed from pretty much every single game, if at all possible, where applicable. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it should be. Now, I would have some people that would disagree, and they would say, well, if you remove all luck from the game, what are they going to do? What are players going to do then? Well, they're going to find their way around it. They're going to play around it. All right? You can, if it's a skill based game, you can play around it. You can see what's going to happen before it happens. Now, my Pokemon, for example, my Pokemon videos, great perspective on this. I make mistakes and I get punished for it. One of the mistakes I made the other day is I should have gone after the Porygon Z and not the Ursaluna. But because I chose the Ursaluna, I lost. If I had gone after the Porygon Z, I might have lost one Pokemon, but I probably would have won the battle. So that's one of those things where the skill does come into play. But there's still, even then, there's too much RNG in Pokemon for it to be effectively looked at as, say, like, here's a great example of where skill matters only and nothing else comes into play, because there's obviously things in play in Pokemon that are RNG related that can haunt you. So it's got its own thing. I'm not even gonna get weakness. It's not worth it. Firebolt 2. He already has Blood Pact. Nice. I'm not even going to buy any other Grimoires because you only need one pet. Imp. For the build I'm going, you only need to summon one pet ever. It sounds cornball. It sounds like, oh yeah, you're just being lazy. Nope. Because if you get any other, like, pets per se, and you start buying all the grimoires for them, it's like, you might be able to use like a Void Walker, tank something. but you could still drain tank it with an imp. Imp gives you health, imp throws fireballs, and you can sit there and get drain life. And when you start going down the affliction tree, there's a ton of affliction spells. Well, one affliction talent, I should say, that says that casting affliction spells, your chance to be interrupted is reduced by 100%. I think it's actually 70% now, but doesn't matter. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's a great thing because you could just avoid getting pushed back from drain life, and you could just sit there and just drain their life right away. You know, us to do stuff like this too. Though not advised, because your imp doesn't take all that much damage before he dies. You can still do it. Oh, I'm gonna die. Hold up. Or am I? Nailed it. Yeah. Warlocks are kind of busted. Now, why did I keep casting Agony on there? Kept him in combat. Kept him latched to me in combat. So they wouldn't go on evade and come back here. I could have backed off and bandaged, but it wasn't aggroed to my imp. Uh, my imp wasn't high enough on the threat table. It was still chasing after me. So it would have done. No, I'm not going to join your public toilet. So what it would have done is it would have gone back to my imp, and or it would have caught up to me and killed me, and then just gone on evade. And so I didn't want that to happen. So what I did is I kept hitting it with Curse of Agony to maintain it in combat. Let my imp generate enough mana so that it could kill the mob. Yeah, it's crafty warlock tricks. But no, it's just there's that nuance of, like, basically my entire video has been me talking about how RNG ruins things. This is a perfect example. Now, I don't get Embalming Echo off of every single mob, nor would I want to. And the drop rate's not bad, because I have to be out here killing the stuff anyway, and I get extra loot for killing extra stuff. But when you make a drop rate like way too egregious that even the player base kind of gripes about, because you had to crank down the RNG so that it's not easy to find, players tend to rebel when something like that happens. And not in a good way. Like, they'll just stop doing the quest, or they'll just stop participating in the game completely. You don't want that. Because if you're trying to get people to play your game and you're trying to get people to stick around to keep playing your game, you kind of have to make the player base happy, but not too happy. It's like that one scene in Futurama. And if you've ever watched it, you'll know exactly what scene I'm talking about. This guy, this gambler, he's having a hallucination, so to speak, about how he's at a casino. He pulls the arm of the slot machine, and he's just like he pulls the arm, and when he pulls the arm of the slot machine, the three the jackpot comes up and spits out a whole bunch of coins, and he's just like, wait, a casino where I win? This must be heaven. Then he pulls the arm of the slot machine again, and he wins again. And then he's like, a slot machine is like a casino where I always win. That's boring. I must actually be in hell. And that's exactly what it's like for making a game and trying to balance it. If everything is too easy, no one will play it because it's too easy. If everything is too hard, no one will play it because it's too hard. You have to find a progression of difficulty that the players look at and say, well, that's not too egregious, that's not too game breaking or back breaking, we'll play it. Or if there's fun mechanics. I mean, like, there are mechanics in a game, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be a mechanic in the game. There are effects in a game where the effect is so much fun that you can't help but play the game. And the effect just happens to be in, oh, I forgot the name of the game. It was a big game a while ago. Um, it was voxel based, fully destructible, world, and uh, you had to kill so many aliens, and it was counting up a score, a really big score. And so, but it was such a good game, and that was, it's one of those things. It was so satisfying to blast the aliens. And it was so satisfying to blow up the world, the actual world around you, and destroy all the buildings and everything, and to see that destruction, to have that be in the game to such a degree that it was satisfying to do. As simplistic as the game was, it was very satisfying. And so that's what kept me playing that game for quite a while. Was that satisfying, explosions, satisfying destructible, world, satisfying splatter of the enemies, so on and so forth. And that's just kind of the things that people like. It's kind of like the old phrasing, um, people they want to feel like their abilities are doing something. You know what I mean? I was gonna say that ain't gonna last very long. He's dead. He's undead. That's not gonna work. Use the imp as bait. Good. You gotta understand, dude. It's undead. I've got cannibalism. I've got bandages. I've got life tap. That's a warlock 100% right there. So now that those are complete, I have a couple others. I have Proof of Demise, which is where I have to go over to the monks. That's the friars and Vacon. It's off in this direction somewhere. But that'll be for another time. After I turn these in. I have 3 of them, so I'm not sure if I'll hit 9. But if I do, I have gear I get to put on. 2 intellect, 2 spirit. Then at 11, I get 2 stem, 2 int. And the warlocks are just, they're fun. They're fun time. But there's that sense of community. Yeah, I didn't chat with anybody new. I could have chatted with that guy. But there's still that sense of community where you the guy invited to a group, whereas in a different, in retail, you'd have been invited to go do dailies, and the dailies would have been just absolutely destroyed in minutes, and you'd be sitting around going, no big deal. And it's sad how the game went. It really is. Because it's a fun game. It really is. More fun than Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 combined. Which, by the way, something I wanted to mention about Diablo 4 before I be done with the video here. Diablo 4 is going to lose. Diablo is going to literally lose its seat at the top of action RPGs. Because you have Path of Exile 2 lurking in the shadows. And I have seen some of this game. And it's not as fast paced as Diablo 3 and Diablo 4. It's slowed way down. It's tactical. It's good. It needs to be a little bit better, in my opinion. It really does. I haven't played it because I didn't buy into it. I'm not gonna buy into it. I'm gonna wait for it to become free to play and come out. But it's good. The look and the feel of the game is good. Now, if they ruin it and they make it fast paced, click fest, you know, like almost like an Adderall fueled misery, they need to stop doing that. I mean, come on. When Elon Musk does a dungeon, I don't even know what they're called, nightmare dungeons or rifts, or I don't know what they're called anymore. But if he does a nightmare dungeon 150 is the level on it. Hardest dungeon there is, and he does it in 2 minutes flat. 1 minute 52 to be exact, 1 minute 53. Then what's the point? I mean, realistically speaking, you're playing the game and you're playing it so fast. Oh, it's done in 1 minute 52. Really? And the fact of the matter that the mobs walking around in the dungeon were actually harder than the boss, it's pathetic. And that's the end game. Now, Path of Exile 2's end game looks nothing like that. It functions nothing like that. I think that these companies need to walk away from having that, edge of your seat. You have to get the game done in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Just back away from that. Nobody's over here snorting Red Bull and pixie sticks ground into and mushed up into a fine paste. Nobody around here is vibrating fast enough that they can hear sounds, not hear sounds, see sounds, and smell tastes and smell sights. You know, they're not vibrating that fast that they can actually warp the fabric of reality. Not everybody plays like that. You play Diablo 1, it's very slow, it's very methodical. You play Diablo 2, you've seen it on my channel, it's very slow, very methodical. You play Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, if you play it slow and methodical, well, you can't. There's no option to play it slow and methodical. You have to play it like, with your head on fire. You've got this big flaming hair, big flaming crown, and your head's on fire, and you're on the edge of your seat with your face blown back like those THX commercials from back in 1990. And that's how you have to play the game. I don't want that. Same way with Black Ops. It's how they're sitting there playing Warzone, and you have these people that are called like, no, we focus on movement. Okay, you focus on movement. That's great. Why do you play like you're constantly on fire? Stop doing that, you goof. That's just my thought on it. And Path of Exile 2 is not doing that. Path of Exile 2 is kind of walking away from that. Path of Exile 1 got so bad at the end game that literally there was a guy that made a build where you didn't actually have to attack. You just had to move through the dungeon. Everything was set up to do auto damage. It was set up to auto cast to nearby enemies. And he just walked through the dungeon and collected loot. And I'm like, that's not playing a game. That's like dungeon crawler simulator, dungeon tour simulator. That's what it was. That's when it gets boring. And I don't understand the appeal of people playing high level Diablo 3 and Diablo 4. I just don't get it. I see the high level PoE 2 stuff, and it's like you actually have to have like a cohesive party. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know the fights. Sounds fun. I'm gonna probably play a lot of Path of Exile 2. Just gonna say it right now. You're probably gonna put some videos up too, but that's gonna be at a later date. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the next few levels of my adventure here. I know I did. I don't know if I'm gonna continue on with it though, because it's taking a long time for me to get views on it, and so I might just kind of back off it a little. I just enjoy playing it, and I don't want to play the character without actually having it recorded, so it's kind of what I'm doing. But I thank you for watching. I fully appreciate everything. And if you have any ideas, questions, compliments, comments, complaints, voice them. Voice them. And people say, oh, well, there you go. You're asking for stuff. Yeah, I'm asking for comments and feedback. You don't have to hit like. You don't have to hit dislike. You don't have to hit subscribe. You don't have to hit any of those. Comments I read. Comments I go through. And that's why I read them, and I can take a look at something and contemplate something. Or maybe get a new perspective on something and then have this dialogue upon reading a comment and have a dialogue back with it. Maybe. We'll see. But I hope everybody has a fantastic evening, a wonderful tomorrow, and as always, have a good one.